Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today is Saturday, August 1st, and I am doing my updated final prediction for the 2026 U.S. Senate primary in the state of Michigan, a very important Senate race for the general election and for the primary as well. This has been perhaps the most talked about Senate primary in all of the elections in 2026, so this is a very exciting video and one I can't wait to break down for you. So the two main candidates in this race, if this is the first you're paying attention to this race, are Haley Stevens and Abdul El-Sayed. Haley Stevens can best be described as like an establishment type Democrat. She has the backing of Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, of Chuck Schumer, and I believe other Democrats, any similar mold like that. Abdul El-Sayed, he's someone you can consider to be more of like a democratic socialist type of candidate. He has the backing of Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and he fits more in that mold of the Democratic Party. We've seen across the country with Zohran Mamdani in New York City that a lot of Democratic Socialist candidates have been doing very successful in the Democratic primaries in this 2026 cycle. Abdul El-Sayed is hoping to keep that streak continuing, whilst Haley Stevens is hoping to win this race and stop Abdul El-Sayed and for her to be the general election candidate. And we're going to go into what they could look like in the general election, if there's a difference between the two and how they'll do, and we can look at all that momentarily. First things first, though, we have to talk about the primary, and we're going to go to Wikipedia, where the winner of this race will be taking on Republican nominee from 2024, Mike Rogers. So let's jump right into it because everyone wants to know who is currently leading in this race right now. Where things currently stand as of the Wikipedia polling averages, and I do have the Decision Desk HQ one up as well, we'll be going to in one moment. Abdul El-Sayed is currently leading across all the polling averages over Haley Stevens. When you look across the average of all the averages here, Abdul El-Sayed is at 49.1%, Haley Stevens is at 40.4%, Mallory McMorrow, who did drop out of the race, but her name does continue to be on the ballot, is currently polling around 5% of the vote, with still another 6% of the vote overall undecided. This accounts for an Abdul El-Sayed lead of roughly 8.7% of the vote. And I'm doing this video on Saturday because I wanted to wait for the Emerson College poll to come out. Emerson College polling this cycle, especially in the New York City mayor's race, was pretty spot on. So I wanted to give it a few more days to wait for the Emerson poll to come out. Now we know that it has. And their results showed that when it starts out with undecided voters, Abdul El-Sayed has 54%, McMorrow has 2%, Haley Stevens has 39%. That overall is a lead for Abdul El-Sayed over Haley Stevens of roughly 15%, with still that 6% undecided number. When the candidates were asked and pushed to choose a candidate, Abdul El-Sayed got 57%, McMorrow had 2%, Haley Stevens had 41%. This is a pretty important rating characterization here, as 15 points or above is considered to be a safe win. So based on the most recent Emerson poll, Abdul El-Sayed is actually leading over Haley Stevens by a safe margin, which is a very big change considering all the polling averages right now. There's a good amount of undecided vote left, but none of them currently have Abdul El-Sayed over Haley Stevens by more than 15 points, whereas this final Emerson poll, it does. We can look here on the Decision Desk HQ polling website as well here. They currently have Abdul El-Sayed at 51.3%, Haley Stevens at 42.1%. And you can see when Mallory McMorrow, around like the beginning of May, began to taper off in the polling, and she ultimately dropped out of the race. I believe around July 6th, she was stopped being factored into the polls here. Abdul El-Sayed and Haley Stevens' support both have shot up a lot in recent days. Even around July 11th, though, it showed a tied race of 42.4 to 42.2. Now, when you come up to, say, July 16th, Abdul El-Sayed's numbers start to go up more than Haley Stevens. He got up to 47.8, Stevens at 42.8, and now that Emerson poll moves it even more in El-Sayed's direction at 51.3 to 42.1. So at this current point in time, it looks more and more likely Abdul El-Sayed is going to win. The question may be ultimately how much. That's on the polling side for Decision Desk HQ. Let's take a look really quickly at the prediction market side, because it's even more drastic here. We can look once Mallory McMorrow drops out. Even just not too long ago, on July 26th, Abdul El-Sayed had a 63% chance to win on Kalshi. Haley Stevens had 37.6%. Today, Abdul El-Sayed is at 93.1%. Haley Stevens at 6.9%. Polymarket's not any different. Abdul El-Sayed is now at 94% chance to win. Haley Stevens is at a 5% chance to win. So you can see here in the last few days, these polls as the primary is getting closer, everything's sort of just kind of like bottoming out for Haley Stevens in this race. Abdul al-Sayed has been doing very strongly. This isn't really too much of a drastic surprise. As again, I've mentioned, these Democratic, Socialist, Progressive candidates have had a very large streak of success in these Democratic primaries in 2026 thus far. Abdul al-Sayed seems to be carrying on that trend. Graham Plattner, before he dropped out in Maine, had a very large percent of the vote. He could arguably fit in that category as well. And even Troy Jackson, who got appointed now for that race, you could argue fits in that category as well. And then obviously Zohran Mamdani fits in that mold also. But Abdul al-Sayed certainly tracking right now to be the leader in these races without a doubt. So that's where things stand on the Democratic primary polling side. I do just want to show you a few, or I think I have one pulled up of the election simulator type of websites here. This is one I've started using recently called electionjoyer.com. This was last updated around 12:07 p.m. Eastern time, so about 10 minutes ago. And for their simulation for Abdul al-Sayed, Haley Stevens, and Mallory McMorrow in terms of default, they have it on their website of Abdul al-Sayed getting 51.1%, Haley Stevens 45.5, and Mallory McMorrow at 3.3, a margin of victory of right around 6 points here. I really like this site, and I've started using this more, especially very helpful for my election night videos, because you can actually adjust some of the vote shares here, and you can look here the margins. Abdul al-Sayed 51%, Stevens at 46. Let's say hypothetically we want to adjust it to a 10-point lead, where maybe Abdul al-Sayed gets up to say, let's go 54%, Stevens at 43. What does it look like? You can see across the state what it looks like. You'd see out of Wayne County, where Haley Stevens wins it by about 17, but Abdul al-Sayed winning by about 11 points or so across the state. You can see what it looks like. If that poll from Emerson's correct, and it's about a 56-41, 15-point lead, this is what the map would look like across the state. A lot of dark green across the state for Abdul al-Sayed. Haley Stevens at 41%. So this primary is going to play a very important role in the general election. But before we know, we have to finish off the primary. And Abdul al-Sayed, if he wins by 15 points, it'll look like this. If the numbers, though, could be off, and maybe Haley Stevens does better than the polling currently suggests, I don't think she's going to win at this point. I think our odds of doing that are very low. But if it ends up being close, which is what it looked like about a few weeks ago, you'll see a lot more. The purple is Haley Stevens. You'll see a lot more across the state. They're currently forecasting about 1.3 million votes for this Democratic primary. Again, we're going to have to wait and see ultimately how it all shakes out, but we're starting to see some significant movement in the final few days in Abdul al-Sayed's direction, and I expect him to win the Democratic primary. So in terms of the primary here between Haley Stevens or Abdul al-Sayed, what is my final prediction here? I'm definitely predicting Abdul al-Sayed win. The question is going to be, does it exceed 15% of the vote or not, is going to be where things ultimately go. Abdul al-Sayed certainly, I think, is more expected to have higher turnout in the state of Michigan. It may fall under 15 points, like a 13 to 14 point victory, but can it break 15% for al-Sayed? I definitely think it can. For right now, I have it. I would shift it if I did another election night to around 13.5 to 14% win. I think Abdul al-Sayed has his primary essentially locked up, but does it break 15%? I have it just under right now, but right around that range. So with Abdul al-Sayed now looking like to be the Democratic candidate, we can shift to the general election, which we'll be doing in coming days. Michigan's going to be one of the closer Senate races on the 2026 Senate map here. And there's a little bit of a difference between Abdul al-Sayed and Mike Rogers and Haley Stevens and Mike Rogers on here. A new website I saw, Electability Index, they have it in their methodology here, where it says market implied probability that a candidate wins the general election given they win the primary election. Haley Stevens currently, if she were the nominee, has a 73% chance to win the general. Abdul al-Sayed only has a 71% chance, so it's a 2% difference. But considering where the argument of electability was made a few months ago, that's not really that much of a gap. Though it is significant, Abdul al-Sayed now has a 94% chance to win the nomination, and 5% for Stevens to win could be affecting those numbers as well. But let's take a look at the polling and the predictions, where most of the predictions have it listed as a toss-up. Right now in the polling averages that there are, Mike Rogers is actually leading over Abdul al-Sayed, in large part due to a new poll from Glenn Gariff Group that came out a few days ago, which is commissioned by the Michigan Education Association and Business Leaders of Michigan. And there they show Mike Rogers at 49%, Abdul al-Sayed 39%, still 11% undecided. Based on the prior polls, definitely seems to be more of a outlier, considering all the polls have shown it to be a very close competitive race. And I don't think Rogers is winning this race by 11 points. That's obvious. That goes without saying. But that does move the polling averages a little bit in Mike Rogers' direction, where Rogers is now leading 45.1 to Abdul al-Sayed's 43, with still roughly 12% of the vote undecided. Now, I cannot stress this enough. Those 12% of the votes or so that are undecided is where things are ultimately going to make or break this race. Because Michigan in 2024, we saw a very close race with Mike Rogers, where he only got 48.3% of the vote. Elisa Slotkin got 48.64% on the same ballot when Donald Trump got 49.73%. So 2026 is expected to be more of a Democratic-friendly election year, and Mike Rogers did not win the Senate race in 2024. Now, there could be an electability question of can Abdul al-Sayed win as many independents over as Elisa Slotkin did, and that could give Mike Rogers an opening to potentially winning the race. But in the election environment that skews more in the Democratic direction, I would still assume Abdul al-Sayed starts with a narrow favorite in this race. That's where that stands there. For Stevens versus Rogers, though, even though this matchup is looking less and less likely, the polling does currently show Haley Stevens does lead over Mike Rogers, a narrow lead, but a lead of 44.8%. Rogers at 44%, 11.2% overall is other undecided. In that Glengarriff group poll, Stevens has 46, Rogers has 45, with 9% undecided there. So it's going to be a very close race either way, I think, for the general election. It truly is one that I think both Abdul al-Sayed and Rogers can win. If Stevens finds a way to get through the primary, I think she could win it as well. It's going to come down to the wire. I do think starting today, though, I would give the Democrat Abdul al-Sayed a slight narrow lead in this race of a lean Democratic margin. Lean Democrat is anything between a 1 and 5% margin of victory. I'd probably have Abdul al-Sayed around like a 2.5 to a 3-point lead right now, but definitely going to be a very close race in the state of Michigan. Ultimately, how things are going for the country towards the last few weeks in late October and early November, that's going to ultimately decide how things go for the general election. I think in the state of Michigan, does President Trump's approval ratings rebound at all? Do they stay the same? Do they even arguably get worse? What's the war in Iran looking like? These things can have very important implications on a lot of swing voters in the state of Michigan, and that may decide the Senate race as well. But that's all I have for you in this video on the election prediction for the Democratic primary. I have Abdul al-Sayed defeating Haley Stevens by a likely margin in between 5 and 15%, specifically around 13.5%. Remember, the election results are going to start coming in on Tuesday. It's going to be a very interesting night. Can't wait to see how this all breaks down. For now, though, that is it. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to hit like and subscribe, and hope to see you in a future video. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, I really appreciate it if you could hit like and hit subscribe as well. It would really help me and my channel out a whole lot if you could do that for me. You can see in the circle in the top left the subscribe here button to subscribe to the channel. On the right, there are going to be 2 video pop-ups for you. My latest video will be on the top, and a recommended playlist by myself will be on the bottom as well. In the bottom left of the screen, you'll see my channel name, Anthony's Election Center, which you are currently watching. On my Facebook, Anthony.ElectionCenter is also there. And if you want to reach out to me on email, anthpredicts@gmail.com is my email. Feel free to pause the video if you need to. If you want to look for any of these, obviously in more time, please feel free. But for now, though, that is it. I really thank you all for watching and hope to see you in a future video.